Good morning.
Good morning. Chair Frederick, Vice Chair Weber, and members of the committee, my name is Emily McLean. I'm here representing the Oregon Education Association, Oregon's teachers union that represents over 42,000 educators across the state. And thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today and for the conversations that we've been having about this legislation. We are testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 1555. And while we appreciate the work of the sponsors to integrate feedback from stakeholders through the work of the -2 amendment and the -5 amendments, the proposal continues to move away from what we see as a transparent method of determining school funding, and there has not been sufficient time to discuss the key substantive changes where there is not agreement across education stakeholders. And like Dana, I do want to acknowledge that OEA has advocated for updates for how we fund schools and consider how we fund schools. For example, we've advocated for lifting the cap on special education weights, and we think that is a critical conversation that can and should be a part of this. I want to speak to the amendments and particularly the practitioner voice aspects. OEA specifically wants to thank the sponsors for the changes that we've seen that requires the cost model to be based on the professional judgment of currently practicing educators. And I saw the updated language that includes from a variety of roles in public schools and school districts across the state. And we would like to talk about that, but we appreciate adding educator voice. And we think that mandating the educator panels acknowledges that those on the front lines are best equipped to identify the resources that our students need. This is a necessary step, but it does not fix the structural instability created by the rest of the bill that we do have concerns with. So I'm going to speak to just a few of those aspects and hope that we can continue conversation on the legislation. So first, the -5 amendment does move from 8 to 6 years, and we appreciate that change since our last conversation at the end of the last week. So thank you to the sponsors for that. We want to say that the original blueprint for what a school needs would really only be rebuilt then in that 6 years. And I appreciate the staff's discussion just now on inflation, but we do want to say relying solely on inflation, we worry, is not adequate. Education is not a static field. Simple inflation adjustments cannot capture the cost of new state mandates, evolving technology, or the qualitative shifts in student mental health needs that we see year over year. This is still a significant change from the 2-year cycle that we see, and also the regular conversations and meetings that the QEC has. And I think that there's more needed discussion for our members to really understand how that would be an improvement, as opposed to a simple adjustment of when the cost comes through. We're also really concerned about this becoming less of a public process and outsourcing outside of Oregon. The bill still requires the state to contract with a public or private entity to develop the cost model. And we maintain that the blueprint of Oregon's education funding is a core public policy function of both the legislature and the governor with their delineated roles. And I do appreciate the conversation that was just put on the record about the legislature being able to reconvene and also the addition in the -5 of the public hearing. So I want to acknowledge that. This work must be accountable to Oregonians and should remain under the direct oversight of a more public body, not handed to a private contractor. We believe that the new process still needs to be discussed much more, including educator voices. We also think that abolishing the independent oversight of the education stakeholders through the change of the QEC is a significant change that has not had enough discussion. And I again want to acknowledge the history lesson that was shared by the good former Senator Dembro, who I appreciate his leadership and his work with our members so much over the years. So we know that parts of this have been a part of the public conversation, but this bill specifically itself has not had that much time. So we understand that while the bill requires an outside entity to build the model, it does really give that final authority and sufficiency to the committee. And this effectively replaces an independent review that includes the appointment from the governor and also the confirmation of the Senate. So I think we can have a substantive conversation about what is more public or what is less public. And I'm almost done. Redefining quality as compliance. And actually, I do want to acknowledge that we've looked at both the -2 and then the -5 was posted about an hour and a half later. So I do think that there's probably some more conversation about the -5, but we are concerned about the shifting goalposts from excellence to the bare minimum. A school district should not be considered standard or high quality simply because it is avoiding a legal violation. Quality must really remain an aspirational standard for student success, including mental health, health support, small class sizes, modern technology, and go beyond legal compliance. I do want to say a short legislative session for us is not the venue for a wholesale reimagining of this constitutional duty to fund our schools. And we worry that it doesn't resolve our concerns around the public-private conversation about how public this conversation really is right now. I do need to respectfully clarify something that was put on the record. It's important to note, with due respect, that OEA did not participate in a work group on this bill. We were invited and really appreciate the open office hours that one of the sponsors scheduled, and we were able to attend on February 6th with both sponsors, and I did really appreciate being able to be there with both of them to ask questions. And we heard from legislative staff who shared a number of their own thoughts. So though the meeting invitation at the end of January and the beginning of February was helpful, I do need to note from OEA, we were not a part of a work group. So though we remain opposed to Senate Bill 1555, I believe that more discussion is needed in the interim in the 2027 legislative session, and OEA shares the passionately shared goals from the senator and representative and former senator to ensure that students have the support that they need and that educators have the resources they need to support students to thrive. So we appreciate being a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.